All right, now you're all trapped. All right, so hello everybody. So welcome to GCAP and my talk today, audio workflow for better lip sync for your indie game. And please brace yourselves. This is maybe a little bit of a dry topic. It's not like a really sexy part of game dev, but I think it's still a very important part. I think good lip sync goes a long way to making your voiceover feel higher quality by really anchoring your voices to your characters and helping to sell the performance. But I also think that lip sync has unfortunately been a choice between something very expensive or very bad for a long time. But it doesn't have to be that way. And to that end, I think we made a pretty excellent and adaptable lip sync solution for Thirsty Suitors. So my goal here today is to share with you all the cool discoveries we made and hopefully save you some of the time and effort that I spent and put this much better lip sync in reach of everybody. So we'll start with going through how we arrived at our solution, and I'll give a little bit of a background on lip sync in general. Please bear with it. I'm not sure how much of this is actually common knowledge or not, so I'm erring on the side of safety. Then we'll get into the nuts and bolts of the workflow itself, and we'll cap it off with a juicy post-mortem on how it all went. But to start, a really quick self-introduction, I'm Anne-Marie. I've been working in the Australian games industry as an audio designer since about 2005. These are some of the games I've worked on or am working on. I'm currently mostly working with Outerloop games on Thirsty Suitors, which is coming out in 4 weeks. Oh my God. And as I mentioned, that's the game I will mostly be talking about today, since it's what we developed this solution and workflow for. So with that in mind, let me set the stage for you a little on the game and the studio itself. Outerloop Games is a fully remote studio of about 15 people spread across the world. It's a really, really lovely group of very talented people. Absolutely love working with them. Their first game was Falcon Age, and I joined up with them at the start of Thirsty Suitors about 2.5 years ago. And rather than just give you the summary of the game, it might be faster and more fun if I just play one of the trailers for you. So let's do that real quick.
Still think it's a good idea to go home? They all hate you, Jala. Can you blame them?
You're way too stubborn to just give up.
Dad, stop being so sensible. Timber Hills, our hometown. Full of gossiping aunties, parental expectations, and your past mistakes. Hope you're ready for some long-delayed emotional catharsis. Because your exes are looking for revenge. Or maybe a date.
Are we flirting, or are we fighting?
Why not both?
Her thighs, they're so powerful. So, I have to make up with my first love, find out what's going on with the creepy skate cult run by a bear mascot, win my mother's approval, and track down my sister who's avoiding me, all before the most dangerous battle of all. My mother is coming to Timber Hills.
The women in your family, they're all terrifying.
I'm doomed. My advice to you, Jala, die now. Acceptable effort.
Yeah, oh, thank you. Yeah, so November 2nd, it's so soon, it's very scary. We've all worked very hard on it, and that's my marketing duties done, making you all watch the trailer. So as you saw, it's a bit of a turn-based RPG with a very heavy story focus. It's almost a 3D visual novel in some parts, with skating and cooking mini-games thrown in. So this brings us to the problem we're all here to solve, which is, with a lot of story, that means a lot of dialogue that needs lip syncing. And by a lot, I mean really, really a lot. It was a little bit of a scope blowout. if you were to put it all in a playlist and just let it play, we have over 9 hours worth of dialogue. You can't even hear it all in one playthrough. It's actually impossible. We didn't manage to voice everything in the game, but from very early on, our goal was to have at least all the main story voiced. We just really underestimated how much the writers were going to write. But, that's a whole other talk and a whole other topic. This is where I must remind you, Outerloop is a team of 15 people. I am but one lone sound designer, and we have but one lone animator. Falcon Age, it was Outerloop's previous game, had, I believe, maybe around 30 lines, and our animator just did those by hand. So, now historically, proper lip sync has largely been the burden of the animation team, but the reason this is an audio talk and not an art talk is because even though we didn't plan on quite this many lines, we did know from very early on that hand animation absolutely wasn't going to be possible for this project. We had to use a solution that didn't involve our animator dying from overwork. So when this happens, it's up to us. It's up to the audio team to be a team player to help make this happen. And this is one of the things that makes voiceover really interesting, actually. I think it's one of the most collaborative parts of game development, especially for the audio team. So with this in mind, 18 months ago, our studio head Eka came to me and asked me if I knew of any lip sync solutions that were a bit more automated. And I said, yeah, sure, but wait a second. Because when I stopped and I thought about it, it had actually been over 10 years since I'd done any games with lip syncing. Because you know what? Indies are very, very clever about avoiding it. Because we've got masks, or you just show the back of the head of whoever's talking, or you use off-screen commentary or narrators who you never have to see, or you put the camera so far away you can't notice a lip movement, or you use still frame animatic style cutscenes. That's the added bonus of being very cheap cutscenes in other ways too. And there's art styles that don't even have faces, can't animate a mouth if there is no mouth. These are actually all real workarounds on games I've worked on in the past 10 years. And honestly, I should just stop the talk here. Save yourselves trouble. Just put masks on all of your characters. Masks are very, very cool. But maybe for some crazy reason you don't want to put masks on everybody. What are your choices then? So let's go on a little detour here into the history of lip sync in video games. Now, if this was 10 years ago, there were two main methods you would use. The first of these is amplitude-driven lip flap. A quick refresher for anyone who is new to lip syncing games. This is a type of lip sync where you just tie the amplitude of your audio file, that is the volume of it, to the lips or the chin bone of your character, and animate their mouth open and close based on that. You would normally put a little bit of a threshold on it so the mouth didn't open for the quietest parts of the word, otherwise the mouth just stayed open for the whole word, looked very dumb. But even then you would still pick up a lot of false positives like M and T and P type sounds where the amplitude tends to be a lot higher than what the natural mouth movement would look like. And especially M, which is really a closed mouth shape. I challenge you to make an M sound with an open mouth, you can't. No. So how does that look? Well, let's take a look at this very, very old example from the Force Unleashed on the Nintendo Wii to really appreciate how far we have come in game development in only 2 to 3 console generations.
No sign of any pursuit. We're already light years away from any Imperial forces.
Then what's wrong?
We have the entire galaxy in front of us. And yet, for the first time in my life, I don't know where to go. I hope you have a plan.
We need to rally the Emperor's enemies. And I need to find someone who can teach me the things that Vader couldn't.
Sounds like we're still hunting Jedi.
And I think I know one who might still be alive.
General Kota?
Yes. When I fought him, he said he'd be part of my future. Let's hope he was right. Head to Nar Shaddaa.
All right, so that was an example of purely amplitude-driven lip flap. Now, obviously, there's other limitations at work, like character models are less detailed, so mouths and faces had less to work with. But this was about the cheapest way to do it 15 years ago. And you can see some of the mumbled lines didn't quite cross the threshold to open the mouth properly as they should, and even the lines with better dynamics didn't always match up super well. But it is very much a case of once you set that up, you can just ignore it forever. It's very, very cheap, looks kind of bad, but you know who was talking. So, if the game is good or the style is cartoony enough, you can kind of get away with it. The other popular cheap method a lot of studios used back then and even today is just looping a generic speaking animation of a character saying like watermelon cantaloupe or even just random mouth shapes exactly the way extras on a film set do to simulate speech. And then you turn it on and off either based on the amplitude of the sound or the duration of the line, whatever suits your purposes best. So this is definitely better in my opinion. You still get bad dub syndrome where mouth movements don't match the words. But I think it still works very well for like cartoony games or unimportant NPCs or like cases where the camera's a little far away, so it's a bit more forgiving. And it's actually also really good for games without voice acting. We actually use this method in Thirsty Suitors for any of the non-voice lines Jala has. So I'll just show you that real quick. Is it going? Let's click it again. Oops, nope. Oh, well, that one didn't make it. Not that. Anyway, use your imaginations. It's a little bit more work from the art team, but again, very cheap. Once it's set up, you can forget about it. But I really wanted something better than either of those very old solutions for our voiceover. This is where I went researching because I was like, it's 2022, right? I don't want to reinvent the wheel. Surely this is a solved problem by now. But then it wasn't. Like, even in 2022, I found that like the missing middle was still there and it was only growing bigger. Like, what gives? I was really upset. From what I could tell, like, indies were still mostly using amplitude-driven lip flap and canned animation. Like, meanwhile, AAA are racing ahead using better and better motion capture or really personnel-intensive solutions like hand-tagging markers or bespoke animations or some combination thereof. And then there was like the third option of some places like CD Projekt Red who were developing a whole AI to do it. Motion capture, I would say, is the gold standard, the best result, but it's just not practical for a lot of teams and budgets to do it well. Most of us are not Larian or Naughty Dog, and we have to make compromises within our means. But I wasn't quite ready to resign us to using what I felt was very outdated lip flap system. Our voiceover and our artists deserve better. So I looked a little further into the AI thing, thinking, well, we obviously can't use CD Projekt Red's AI, but maybe there are some other accessible solutions in the machine learning space. And this is where I wound up in the academic wilderness and learned an awful lot about our solution, forced alignment. So what is forced alignment? I didn't know, which is why I'm giving this talk, because I have since met quite a lot of other people who also didn't know. So now I'm on a mission. Forced alignment is when you have a speech file and a matching text transcript, and a trained algorithm uses that to figure out what phonemes play when. Another way to think about it would be to say it is voice recognition made more accurate by knowing what the voice is supposed to be saying. If you're unfamiliar with the term phonemes, those are basically all the smallest distinct sounds within language, sort of like syllables, but even more broken down. There's 44 phonemes in English, each with a corresponding viseme. That's a mouth shape. So therefore, with forced alignment, you can know what mouth shapes to play when. And the really funny part about looking them up is you get exactly two sources. One is preschool level teaching resources, and the other is very dry university level academia. There is nothing in between. Also, I also just threw in here the phonetic pangram we use for testing. This is the quick brown fox sentence equivalent for phonetics, which I am not going to try to say because it took me like 20 takes to do it for our game. Now, I want to be clear, like, forced alignment is not that new. We are not the first people to use it. A lot of bigger studios have been using it for a while, though often like with a very heavy amount of hand editing involved, because like the accuracy, especially for early adopters, hasn't really been quite there. But for indie, some options do actually already exist for Unity and Unreal. So why didn't we use them? I can't speak for Unreal, but there were a couple of issues for why we didn't use any of the existing forced aligners available in Unity that might also be relevant to you. So the ones available at the time were largely real-time and a bit of a memory hog. And honestly, also like not that good. I don't want to call any plugins out as shit because they're all improving all the time. But for the memory they chew, the result wasn't really worth it. Also, like, a lot of them are also PC only, and if you're shipping on consoles, which we are, you're out of luck. But the biggest issue was that none of them, not even the offline ones, could fit into our workflow without a lot of headaches. So there's a pretty common problem with third-party plugins, where they all seem to believe they're the only third-party thing you'll ever use. And we're using WWise for our audio middleware, and all of our story text and subtitles are done with another plugin called Ink. It was easy enough to get Ink to work with WWise, but all of the forced alignment plugins we could find only worked with base Unity audio. And like, there's this breakpoint with every plugin where adapting it to your project is more work than just coming up with something new yourself. But I was not quite ready to give up on forced alignment as our solution, though. Like, I really felt this was the missing middle I was looking for. I just needed to find the right workflow for us. So how did we solve this problem? Well, the first thing was to track down the best possible forced aligner we could get our hands on. And credit to Darren Treble for this one. He'd investigated forced alignment back in the day for Hand of Fate and pointed me towards one called Gentle. Gentle is an open-sourced forced aligner developed by some brilliant people at MIT, and in my opinion, it blows all the other forced alignment tools out of the water. It does come with a big old caveat, and that only works for Linux and Mac. So to run it, you do need to either like have a Linux or a Mac, or you can also just run a Linux shell. We use Docker to get around that. It was only a little bit of a pain to set up, and then it was fine. So when you feed Gentle a waveform and its corresponding text transcript, it will spit out something like this. And right there was everything we needed: a timestamp, a duration, the phoneme. And if you have a text file, you can automate anything. And to record voiceover, we already had a spreadsheet with the file name and the line contents, so this gave us all the ingredients we needed to make this batchable. Actually, no, there was still one last missing step. How do we tell the game this information? The easiest and most obvious way was surely waveform markers. Just about every audio middleware and every engine can read marker data inside waveforms, and it's pretty trivial to use it to drive in-game behavior. WWise has this functionality, so does Fmod, Unreal. Even Unity has had this capability for years and years and years. I think the most common use in games used to be loop points for music. It's a fairly underutilized audio tool, I think, but I abused the heck out of it on this project. Which left one more hurdle to overcome: how to get these markers into the wave files en masse. There's quite a few tools to extract marker information from waveforms, but nothing to batch them in. Isotope RX can do it on a single waveform, but it wasn't really batch friendly out of the box. But this is where our very brilliant programmer Justin came in, took the output from Gentle, and made a batch tool to convert it into markers onto the corresponding wave files. So you'll have to take his word for it, but he told me it actually wasn't that hard. It was probably just more likely nobody has ever wanted to do it before. So yes, you probably will need a programmer to help you to do this, but it's supposedly not that scary. And the end result looks like this, if you can see it. I'll just play these lines quickly to give you an idea of the density and give me a chance to drink water.
You want love? Get a dog.
Add curry leaves, turmeric, cloves, curry powder, fennel seed, cardamom pods, a bay leaf, and a cinnamon stick. Mix it in with the aromatics so they absorb all that nice flavor.
Yeah, so can you imagine hand tagging that? The first line, maybe not so bad, but that second line, the nightmare. So I fully hand-tagged about 6 lines in the end, and it took me probably 5 minutes on average per line compared to 6 seconds for our tool to do this. So if you were to hand-tag everything, that's 634 hours of human effort. That's 15 working weeks versus 12 hours of the tool doing it, and the tool was better and more accurate than me. So with these markers, we then told the game which blend shape to play, and ta-da, we now had Lipsync. So let's take a good look at the final result.
I suppose you're not wrong. It runs in the family, kiddo.
I haven't made it to Tyler yet. Was your first big love as completely disastrous as mine?
Oh, aren't they always? My first love was named Lakshmi. She worked the desk at a garage I moonlighted at sometimes back in the day. We kissed once by the copier. And when she left the job, I was despondent for a year.
That sounds awful.
It's fine. It wasn't just her, you know. It was about what she meant to me. Remember, Jala, the first time your heart breaks open, it's a growing pain. You don't have to fight it. God, I should charge for advice this good.
So we were pretty happy with this. Like, it looks good, right? Like, the workflow is more expensive than just setting a fire and forget lip flap, but the result was like so much better. I think it was really worth it. And also, because the animation is tied entirely to the audio, there is no chance of the animation ever getting distinct from the lip sync the way some baked animation solutions can. So if you're playing the game on a potato, at the very least, the lip sync will always remain accurate. And maybe not some of the other sounds, but the voiceover will. But the party didn't end there, actually. Once we had the system set up, we were like, wait, what about facial expressions? Can't we just use markers to drive those too? And we can. It was as simple as adding a marker with the blend shape, its strength, and its duration. For this one, we just added it in brackets to the spreadsheet that contained all the transcripts, at either the start of the line or on the whatever word you wanted the facial expression to change on. And then when we ran our tool, it would add that marker in along with all the phoneme markers. Is this time consuming? Yes, there was over 9 hours of dialogue to audition. Did we manage to batch process this? No. I looked into automated sentiment analysis, and I will tell you what I learned is that it kind of sucks. It's okay at interpreting sentiment like an extreme macro level for like a general trend, but then micro per line level, it is wrong too often to make it worthwhile. There are models that claim it can detect it from audio. It can't. NVIDIA says it has one that can detect it from text. Not very good either. If your script is written for an audience like above a children's show level of emoting, it falls apart very quickly. You cannot handle sarcasm at all. It cannot handle sentiment changes midline either. So like, take a line like, "Did you love me, Jala?" It can be angry and accusing. It can be sad or begging. Or it could even be like an indifferent performance. All three performances are valid, and all three tell a very different story and call for a very different facial expression. It all comes down to the acting, and the sentiment analysis tools just like aren't there yet. So in the end, all sentiment analysis was done manually. Not the worst thing in that I think it was very good to listen to every line at least once. From a QA perspective, it caught a lot of flow issues, like a few glitches and volume discrepancies. And ultimately, I do think slamming some brackets into a spreadsheet is still about the fastest way I can think to do expression tagging en masse. So even though it was one of the more labor-intensive parts of the whole process, it wasn't too bad. So let's take a look at another example with some of those expression tags included. Oh, please play, come on. Oh dear. Well, I don't know what's gone wrong here, but just pretend they're emoting. I will revisit this clip later. Hopefully that version will work. Fingers crossed. But yes, like what would happen is that the expression would change midline at the right place, and then like you could even do it for single words. And it is like a bit more like janky looking than you'd hope, but we'll come back to that. But you know what, let's go into the workflow. So in the end, the workflow looked like this, where the writers wrote the script in ink. We imported the ink scripts into a spreadsheet. We assigned each line a unique ID to be the file name. We then recorded the script, cleaned, named, and edited all the waves accordingly. We did sentiment analysis on each line and updated the spreadsheet with expression tags. We then ran the batch tool with Gentle to add markers onto the wave files. We imported those wave files into Wise. We created the corresponding events. We then imported those event references back into Ink, then made sure all of the speakers had the marker handler component with their blend shape sets assigned. These last couple of steps, I think, would probably be unique to our team specifically, given that it was ultimately done that way as an easy workaround for Ink. We already had support for playing back audio events in it, and that's also where our speaker tags and cameras were run from. It would really depend on how your game was triggering your VO and subtitles, how you would choose to do it. And then, of course, after all this is the scariest step of all, QA, and fixing all the places where this admittedly quite long workflow tripped up. And it did trip up. Now, while I do think that it worked out fantastically for us, and we are overall very happy with the result, it would be remiss of me not to share with you some post-mortem thoughts on it. There are things that can be improved, and maybe some of you will be the ones to improve them. So let's start with the obvious. How good was it really? How much did the automation here fail? I know any programmers in the audience, this is what you really want to know. Actually, the result was way better than I thought. We got a lot of juicy data, so I'm pretty confident in saying that. It's a pretty decent sample size, right? Out of 8,846 lines, 1,237 of those didn't require lip sync because of that magical mask or narrator property, leaving us with 7,609 lines running through this workflow. Of those, about 4% of lines had some kind of problem. That number I'm getting purely from the could not locate phoneme message. Now that's 300 lines, which sounds scary. However, most of those lines, it was something like dropping a word in the middle of a bundle of words or missing the front or the back half of a word. And they were issues you would only notice if you were watching the lips like a hawk. So, they pretty much just got ignored. They were good enough. And a good chunk of those were also from Dad's performance, and he helpfully had a big old mustache which covered up a lot of smaller issues. So here is a line I didn't even notice until I was grabbing some clips for this talk. It's one of the many examples of good enough that probably could have been fixed, but it wasn't really worth fixing it over doing polish elsewhere. So judge for yourselves and please work. Oh no. Why did only the first two videos work? Damn. Well, I might have to consider getting the laptop hooked up.
There's a help button. There's a tech help button here apparently. I don't know where the tech help button.
Oh, okay. You know what? We've seen. Yeah, we've seen the most. Maybe grab someone, but. That's all right, we'll power on, and hopefully I'll actually get to show you what it looks like. If nothing else, I got the laptop here, so we can just hook that up, and it'll all work fine. But, all right, well, let's just move on from this. But excluding those very minor misses, if we just looked at the QA reports and the issues reported to me by the team, there were 127 lines in the end, which actually needed special attention, which was less than 1.6%. So where were most of the problems for those 127 that took extra attention? About half of those were actually ID issues, human error in spreadsheet and file editing phase. Also, our tool to import the event references back into Ink was very strong, but there were a lot of specific cases it couldn't handle, such as lines which had a lot of extra code or formatting. Luckily, this was just a quick event reference add in text. For the forced alignment issues themselves, I was pleasantly surprised that 25 of them were easily handled by just tweaking the transcript more carefully and rerunning it. It really needed to be an exact match to work. Also, pronunciation and elocution varied quite a lot across the actors, and that sometimes meant breaking down the word as it was actually spoken, which in the end left me with 15 lines that needed actual hand tagging. About half of those were laughter or wordless vocalization-related problems. Gentle does not handle these super well generally. Outside of those, only 6 lines needed to be fully hand tagged. There were probably more problem lines that didn't get noticed, but this was everything that got picked up in playtesting. So actually, the biggest fail point wasn't the forced alignment, it was the event import into Ink. But I'm still pretty happy even with that. Luckily, we had great QA who was very, very good at finding those broken lines. So I mentioned, oh look, these are even gonna work, we'll find out. I mentioned one of the characters that struggled with was Dad. He had one of the strongest accents in our cast. It was something I was a bit worried about because even though the game is set in Pacific Northwest America, it's very immigrant focused, so there was a lot of accents to contend with. And voice recognition software is famously bad at this, but I'm pleased to report it also did very well here. So let's check out Bruno, because he had a Malaysian accent. Please work, Bruno. Oh no, only the first few videos made it, I think. Well, we did Malaysian, we did Tamil, we did a more British Tamil accent with Mom, and South African with Andalay. And it handled them all like a champ. You're just going to have to take my word for it until we can sort out any video problems. And, all right. And the two characters that most had the problem with was Dad and Dia. For them, I believe it was sort of a less to do with the accent and more the clarity in the enunciation. And the other character, like Dia was the other character struggled with, and mostly because I think she tended to speak very fast. But even then, handled most of her lines just fine. It was just, they were the two statistical anomalies. Gentle definitely handled the accent spectrum better than most voice recognition. Oh, you got anything?
That's right, keep going.
Okay. Yeah, so it handled the accents better than most voice recognition related tools, but I also probably wouldn't throw Scottish or Welsh or French at it without doing some tests first, like just something to keep in mind. Probably the more interesting issue was the sheer number of out-of-dictionary words we had to contend with. Here we go. So to explain briefly, Gentle has a library of known words it uses to know what phonemes to look for. It's also worth noting that because of this, Gentle only works for English. You could theoretically make it work for other languages by like phonetically transcribing your script, but at that point, is it worth it? No. Like any library though, it is not comprehensive. We had a transcript replacements text file that we used to supplement this and feed Gentle information that it could actually recognize. We ultimately wound up making a whopping 780 transcript replacements. There are obvious use cases, such as like proper nouns. Obviously, all the character names needed to be added. Almost all of the recipes. It definitely didn't know like kirabath or uttapams or parathas. It is a very American-centric library. But beyond that, there's a few other tricksy things you might not think of, like numbers. You have to write them out as they are said, not how they appear in text. Also, every single little flourish in the writing has to be accounted for in your transcript. This will quickly make you secretly resent the writing team for things that aren't even their fault. Like, how many O's should no have? The possibilities are apparently endless. Gentle is also an incredible spell checker. If there is a single typo or spelling error, it will find it and it will say, hey, this word's not in my library. I fixed like dozens and dozens of spelling errors to smooth the way for Gentle. It was kind of actually an unexpected boon that it was an American library because our primary writer lives in the UK, right? And the game was meant to use USA spelling. So like, we've all had this problem here in Australia, right? Like Gentle absolutely found all of the UK spellings in our transcript, every single one. Like there was a few I didn't even know about. Like who knew that they spelled chili differently? Now these weren't actually that big a deal to handle, and in some cases it was good because, it did QA for us. But it did slow things down a little bit, again, mostly because we had like 8,000 lines. And every job is a huge job when you multiply it by 8,000. So I mentioned before, processing per line averaged around 6 seconds per line, which checks out to 12 hours for the whole lot. But due to the frequent transcript replacements, I had to run it 2 to 3 times on nearly every character. And it is a memory hog of a process. It doesn't take any memory at runtime in the game, but I would not recommend trying to work on a normal workflow process while Gentle is running in the background. I got around this by using a second machine to run Gentle while I did other things, and this meant it didn't actually really matter. Definitely, though, do use a build machine for this. It would have been a very big hit to my productivity otherwise, at a time in the project when I had no time. Which does bring me to the next point. This does take like a huge burden off the animation team, but damn, that left them free to make a whole lot more animations while I was busy doing this. It was a little bit of a rough time keeping up with everything while this was going on, as I'm sure all the audio people here would be well aware. Audio tends to get squeezed between like the mighty forces of art and design and the ship date. And ultimately, while it was a very fair trade for better Lipsync, it did have some impact on how much audio polish I could do. But that said, I think the workflow is simple enough that you could easily train pretty much anyone to do it. If I were to attempt to scale again, I would definitely delegate it a lot more. Okay, so speaking of scale, one thing I want to bring up, which was pretty great, was how scalable the solution actually is. There are 44 phonemes, and therefore 44 corresponding mouth shapes. But you don't actually need to do 44 shapes per character. You can group them up in sensible ways. A lot of the differences are pretty subtle, and you can like mix and match weightings to get like the right approximations. Oh, this video works. All right, well, we did 7 plus 1 for mouth open or closed, and then 4 expressions on top of that: frown, smile, pout, and teeth clench. 90% of our sentiment wound up being covered by frown and smile. Teeth clench we could have done without. I think I used it like about 5 times. We did have to do it per character. Again, we only have 1 character modeler, so we chose an amount that was doable for us. With more resources, you could do more detailed and even better lip sync, or if you're a bit stretched and have a lot of characters, you could drop it down to 4 or 5. It has a lot of built-in flexibility. But that's like a bunch of great things about it. Like, what were the things we think could have been better or we weren't happy with? So we will definitely use this solution on the next game, but one area we really want to improve on is the expression tagging. So the actual tagging, we think, is probably the best solution for us, but the way we handled blends on this meant that it was very easy to make it look bad at higher strengths. It also didn't interact super well with some lip sync, forcing the mouth closed. Just fighting animation blends, basically, was the problem. Our workaround was to have the expression weighted with the mouth more open, but then that meant you lost some of the closed mouth phonemes, like the M's and, you know, the little gaps. And if you remember back to, well, I mean, you don't because we didn't get to play it, but this was the problem we had back then. Maybe this one will work. No, it's, okay, pray for us. Here we go. Ah, no, it just hates audio. Never mind. Well, yes, one way we compromised with it was by using much weaker strengths on the facial expression blends to mitigate this. We didn't actually solve it. It meant that despite all of our work on the manual sentiment analysis, a lot of the facial expressions wound up more subdued and neutral than we wanted. It wasn't an issue we really picked up on until we hit full scale, and by then it was too late. The problem was also like worse on some characters than others. Honestly though, if we didn't have this, we probably wouldn't have any variable expressions in a lot of places, so it was still better than nothing. But it does also mean after some players stop speaking, like their mouths are left slightly open with some expressions. We did kind of mitigate this by sometimes cutting off the expression as soon as the word ended, but you know, that in turn does give you that emotional whiplash effect. It's a bit of an art problem, so I'm not quite sure yet how we're going to properly solve it for the next project. It's a bit outside my wheelhouse, so you know, if anyone has any good ideas, definitely hit me up and share them. One other thing I'd like to do is perhaps a shouting modifier, so increase the strength of the mouth open based on whispers or shouting. There were a few points in the script where our characters were whispering or shouting. I think it could have looked a little bit more natural. You can't really run it off amplitude alone because we do tend to somewhat compress voiceover, and like here you can see 3 examples. One of a stage whisper, one of a normal speaking line, one of a shout, and there's not that much difference in amplitude between them.
You owe me this. Meet me outside the park when you're done.
Do you even really want to get married?
I regret everything!
I do regret everything. But yes, yeah, you can see if we just ran off that, like, there's not enough difference. Like, obviously, shouting and talking normally is only a little bit of a mouth open difference, but I think it would be a good bit of polish that you could add without too much effort. Like, maybe a toggle to turn on the multiplier for the strength of the mouth open might be a good way to handle this. Like, it's just conjecture at this point, though. You know what, that could maybe solve the blend shape fighting with facial expressions, but we will find out on the next project. The biggest thing, of course, I think is actually more body language, and animation would go a very long way. But obviously, at some point, it moves on from lip sync to cutscene creation to enhance performance. The whole point of this workflow is to use audio markers to drive animation, but audio cannot and should not solve everything, so yeah, just forgive yourselves for that. And on that note, I think that about wraps it up. So well done on bearing with this and unfortunate tech issues. Please trust me, it's very good. At least we had one working example. I hope you all learned some good stuff about forced alignment. And even if this workflow doesn't work for you, I hope you got some good ideas out of it. And that you are now empowered to deliver better lip sync for your teams. And broken free of the shackles of masks and like other cheeky workarounds. Also, if you want to message me about any of this, I haven't quite figured out what the new best social media is going to be, but I do still have a Twitter you can drop me a message on, and I'll eventually see it, or LinkedIn. I'm also on there too, I don't know. Yeah, please feel free to reach out with any questions or comments. And yeah, how are we doing on time? Yep. Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions for Anne-Marie? Thank you for the presentation.
Oh, no, thank you. Let me get a quick drink of water. Yeah, I think we got a question there.
I was just wondering how you handled, I think they're called homograms, words that are spelt the same, sound different?
Spelt the same, sound different.
Mind.
I mean, it doesn't matter if it...
Could I
oh, yes, sorry.
Yeah, maybe it's easier if you have a question, just speak it into the lectern, because this session is getting recorded. So.
Okay.
No, it's all right. I'll repeat it. So the question was how to handle homograms, which is words that are spelt the same but sound different. We didn't come across that. You could just replace it in the transcripts if it came up, I think. But I don't think the level of complexity we went with, I don't think anyone would notice either. Like, it's pretty forgiving. Like, you know, we weren't photorealistic, so people aren't going to pick up on slight differences. Yeah. Any other questions?
I was just wondering if the forced alignment step needed like a calibration type thing per actor or voice, or if it could just, yeah, how that worked.
Not at all. The forced alignment worked. Any calibration would be on the blend shape level. What the artists made specific blend shapes for each character. They cut the heads off. They made blend shapes for each mouth.
Yeah. So even amongst between accents, it's reasonable enough that like a waveform of someone saying "per" looks like a waveform of someone saying.
Yeah. It didn't have a problem. Like I said, with the it would maybe struggle with. Some more extreme accents, like Scottish or something, but we had Malaysian, most of our cast was at least, is American hybrid accent, so that gave us a leg up, but our actor for Underlay was from South Africa, so it was true blue South African accent, and it handled it just fine. Yeah, so no calibration, just fire it off, and yeah, people at MIT are brilliant, good on them. Any other questions? Oh, Xander, thank you.
So I guess this is all an exercise in sort of helping out the animators, really. But how did you go about, I suppose, talking to the team about the resources you would need to do this?
Well, we're a very flat team, so I basically said, well, this is a way we could potentially do this, and it's really awesome, and I think it's worth exploring. And they said, okay, we'll look at it, and they all agreed, and it was basically either this or, the old versions. So I think once we had a little test case done up, luckily we did it at the time of the project when programming still had a lot of time. So our programmer was very willing to experiment with me. I wouldn't try and do this during, crunch time when VO tends to come in. We had about 200 lines initially for a demo. That was our test case. And we were very happy with that. So that was why we did everything else after that. Wait, another question at the back.
Hi, sorry if this is actually an obvious question because I'm only in the earliest stages of learning sound design programming, but do you think, would there be any complications in terms of adapting this to 2D animation? Do you think this process is kind of mostly tailored to 3D animation like this?
You could absolutely do this for 2D animation. I imagine for 2D, you'd probably just have a frame with the right mouth shape, and you could just switch between the frames. Yeah, it could 100% work for that. No worries at all. All right, any others? Oh, yeah, we have one more. Thank you for keeping the questions going. Making up for all the time that the missing video stole.
I was just wondering if it would be possible to potentially roll the sentiment stuff into the writing part of the workflow so that if you had some way of sort of like script writing, having those signifiers of emotion be written in and then translated from a script. Obviously, you were using ink, which has its own limitations, but is then turning what the writer says, like angrily, is able to interpret that as something that needs to be a marker as opposed to be in the script in order to roll those together.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, you could. I don't think you could do it exhaustively that way, because one thing is, obviously we have direction notes on all of our writing for performances, but we also have to take into account how the actors choose it, because we had a lot of really interesting performances in the game where it's like, oh, the actors took this direction I didn't expect, and that's very valuable input they give. But you're running the slate. That would have been a very good time to do it. At the time, I didn't think of that. Would have saved me a little bit of grief. Yeah, definitely. But again, it wasn't too bad because you should listen to all the audio you put in the game at least once, right? So even if there's an unreasonable amount, it wasn't too bad to do it the other way. It gave me an excuse to audition all the audio one last time. Question at the back.
Hi. You talked about the little issue with writers where you're like, how many O's are in an O, or that kind of thing. Were there any other, I guess, points of friction perhaps isn't the best word, but like things that you'd love to kind of, if you were doing this again, that you would kind of say to writers at the start of that process?
Well, I don't, for example, yes, I would, but I also wouldn't want to cramp their creative style either. I complained about it mightily, right? Because I was in the weeds when I was doing it, but I don't think it was actually that bad. And it was probably me just having to, grumpily find another no and count how many O's are in it and put it in the transcripts text file is probably not worth them having to interrupt their flow state when they're writing. And and it's useful doing it that way because, the voice actors see the no has a lot of O's on it and they perform accordingly. So, yeah, it's, I think that's fair because also things like the numbers as well. In the text, you're not going to write it out. You're just going to have a mismatch between your transcripts and your actual subtitles just to make it work.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's all we have time for. So, thank you.
Thank you all for coming.